So I just would like to respond to some of this, and it's really interesting. It's been a theme of this day so far that a lot of people are having the same ideas, very similar ideas at the same time. And so I'm going to say a few things that have already been said in somewhat different ways. And my name is Francis Chanfroca. I founded a company called Bayshore Networks. Now, these days, I'm working with a service provider, IoT security service provider called Insight Cyber Group. And I also, and this is not announced yet, so I can't give any details, but I've also founded with some pretty impressive partners, watch for the press release, a new center for research in IoT security, and we're actually going to be publishing research on these various issues. And I'll get to that. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the work we're doing specifically. But I've spent years working in business, making a business out of helping people to protect ICS systems from cyber threats. So I feel like I've got a good amount of practical perspective as to what doesn't work. All right, what people think should work that really just doesn't have a prayer, and what approaches actually make more sense. And I'm going to say one thing here that's different than you've heard up till now, and a statement I hear very, very often, which is, why has there not been a major impact yet with major loss of life? And I think in this forum, we're talking to people who understand the threat, and you just heard a lot of good explication for why these potential threats are real. But we also talked about leadership and governance, all right? And both at the business organizational level and at the government level. Cities are more challenging than federal government, and I really, really want to believe that what I've seen happen in very large corporations, household name companies, as they go down the path of digitization, and they say, well, we're not going to do this. We're going to forego the business benefits of certain things that we could do, all right, because we're not sure about the security effects. I'm really, really hopeful that as a society, and I'm confident about the federal government, okay? I'm less confident about the cities in taking that approach, and that goes right to, yes, exactly what you're saying. It's like, all these interesting, cool things that you can do with smart sensors and knit them together and produce interesting efficiencies also produce tremendous dependencies and, the complexity. That's something I think about, same as you guys, all the time. But again, this statement of why has there not yet been a major impact outside of Ukraine, all right, that kills people or degrades the environment in horrible ways. God help us, it could happen someday, and then the whole conversation is going to change overnight, and the people in this room, okay, are going to be the ones called upon to have the answers on that day, so be ready for it. Some of the work that I've been involved with, again, thinking about this from a next generation perspective, how you go from extending traditional security methodologies to IT, IoT, ICS, IIoT, and all the complexity that produces. How do we get beyond that? And one of the things we think about a lot in my new research center is autonomous systems. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, all right? What I use, and paradigmatically in terms of connected car, self-driving cars, well, you've read all these stories about that, but autonomous systems more generally are systems that are connected, okay, and they have a cyber response to their environment which doesn't have a human in the loop, or it might have under certain circumstances. And I find it really fascinating to see how we've done automation and connectivity for ICS. It's basically take a lot of standard processes, a lot of machines, and a lot of infrastructure that we've been doing for 100 years, okay? That's when PID controls were invented, sorry about that. And they've, DCS has been around since the 80s, right? So the networking has been there, but adding a computerized layer, a cyber layer of control, digitization, data collection, applications, optimization. What's funny about that it's imposed on top of the underlying cyber layer, which is totally undefended. Okay? So one of the things we're thinking about is, and this is going to connect to what all of you have said in one way or another, we're trying to think of, can you endow an autonomous machine with foundational beliefs? You know, this gets to how you actually design them, and we've worked out a framework in NIST style for manufacturers and people who maintain and operate autonomous machines, and we're focusing on that area. Okay, machines in general is a much broader topic, but autonomous machines is almost greenfield, right? From this perspective. I think it will be very important for a machine, an autonomous machine, to have in firmware, not software, okay, a set of foundational principles that his manufacturer, I said his manufacturer, that was Freudian, that her manufacturer builds into the firmware and that represent operational constraints that can never be violated, regardless of the cyber environment. Okay, and all three of you have crept up on the same concept. So that's one thing. Context-based modeling. All right. I've got a good amount of experience recently working with a system that military, so won't get into detail. But the idea is, it's a cyber-physical system. The cyber lies. Okay, you can't really be sure about what it's telling you. The physical, am I going over time, Sid? Do you want me to, you want to wrap? Because I know we want to leave time for Q&A.
Yeah, I don't think we have time for Q&A.
All right, okay, well, let me just finish quickly. All right. Short story, if you're going to put controls either in the network or on the actual commands that are going to an ICS system, have them be context-based rather than just based on signatures or based on statistical anomaly detection. All right, and that's a story like, for example, machines can be commanded to do certain things, and the commands are there because those are features. They're there for really good reasons, but they're not always appropriate, and if you can model the times when certain commands can and should be issued and when they're unsafe, that's a big change in practice. And the very last thing I want to say is, we've talked a lot about machine learning, artificial intelligence as it relates to managing the new smart cities, but there hasn't, honest to goodness, been a lot, and this is controversial perhaps, not been a whole lot of research on how you do machine learning in the context of security, all right? And we're working on some approaches based on so-called deep learning, which is the convolutional neural networks. They have the big advantage that they are computationally more efficient and produce smaller models so you can deploy them in edge devices. And we think that's something that hasn't really been approached, because you think about machine learning, it's like, 5 billion images and, 6 weeks or 6 months shaping the data so that you get, and then training it and all that stuff. There needs to be a better way to do that, and we think that we've come up with some, interesting innovations to adapt existing practice, which is image recognition and natural language processing, to actual security questions, and I think there's some promise to that. And that's controversial, but we'll find out, so stay tuned. All right, thank you, Sid. All right.
Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. If you'd like to ask a question, that would be fine. If you want to be the one that's blamed for holding up the beer, that's at your risk. I mean, I'm happy to say a few comments and take the blame, but that's fine too. Does anyone have any? There's a question back there. Mark, right beside you? Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay, here's one up here too. Okay. So what was your name so we know who to blame? I'm sorry.
Too bad. My name is Chris Davis. I'm VP of Smart Cities at Simcom Lighting. I'll be moderating a panel on Thursday and presenting also. I go to a lot of these conferences. Cybersecurity is always a topic, and what I find lacking in all of them is the fact that nobody really thinks about the complexity of cybersecurity for cities. And the reason it's quite complex is because it's a heterogeneous mix of OT, IT, a zillion types of networks, legacy city systems, instrumenting the physical world with sensors, controls, and other instruments. And I just think that it's not being approached, from what I've heard, in a very holistic, top-down approach, because it's a huge problem. I live near Boston. The city of New Bedford, which is the largest commercial fishing port by value on the East Coast, population of about 100,000, old industrial city, smart city, by the way. They have over 47 legacy city systems and databases, and they've put in 10,000 streetlights. They're not smart yet. They've done a lot of instrumentation, and it's just something I think that we as an industry need to sort of change the direction and get away from the theoretical. So I'd appreciate your comments. Thank you.
I don't want to take too much time, but I think that was kind of the key theme. I think we need to look at things systematically. And I think one of the big concerns I've heard a little bit of here, there tends to be a focus on looking at the individual components. And although that may be helpful at points, it really misses the key point. And I think, I'm not optimistic enough to think everything can be solved, but so much can be solved if you just step back away and really try to understand what's going on. And it's not that hard, but so far, not a lot of people are interested in doing that. That's why, as a group here, we have to kind of help move that forward.
I'd like to say to that point, if I might, in a smart city, unlike in a factory or an oil company, you've got a lot of different competing organizational centers of power that all have their own goals and all their own budgets and an ability to do things in relatively uncoordinated ways that you don't find in a business organization. And that's a big thing, because you can't, the dependencies appear when they're not coordinated, and if you don't have that coordination at the leadership level, you get that problem. Oh, yeah, well, sure. Oil and gas upstream, what you do is all outdoors. Yeah, sure.
Chris, just so you know-
My mom lives in New
Go ahead.
Bedford, so I'll try to help make sure things are good there.
I was just going to comment. I tried to make the point. Just so you know, ARC agrees with you completely, because we talked that's one of our themes with respect to smart city cybersecurity, is this need for an integration of all these different types of cybersecurity, not these little islands of cybersecurity, because the issues are too complex and you need a collaborative thing. So, very good point. Was someone back there? Still have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Marty.
Marty Edwards, I'll take the blame for the beer. I like beer because I like the conversation
Stale
better.
bear.
So my question actually was very similar to the organizational conversation, and that's, do you think, I think what I heard in the last answer is that in general, city, local, even state governments, probably to a certain extent, are at a disadvantage organizationally in solving a problem like this, just due to bureaucracy and lack of coordination, et cetera, that perhaps a big corporation doesn't. So what advice should we give city planners, state planners, et cetera, to help them out? I mean, I have a little bit of experience in the emergency communications section, and I can tell you that it takes an inordinate amount of exercising and planning to get the right pieces of the bureaucracy to function in times of crisis.
Well, let me first be clear. Not all corporations have their act together. I mean, there are many of them that
Some of them are big enough, they're like their own government,
exactly.
right?
So just be clear. But you are right, because you get all these competing forces. But that's why we have, in theory, leaders, mayors, governors, and so on, whose goal, in principle, is to help to get the population, which means the organizations, together. Our research so far and our experience so far, that's why I'm looking for a counterexample, is most of them aren't interested in doing that, or at least haven't risen to the occasion. I'm not saying it's easy, but mostly people have the skill set to mobilize their population if they wish to do so. And that's part of our goal, is to help educate them and why it's important for them to do so, and to help to mobilize their populations.
But is it the population that they're mobilizing?
Well, it's not just, obviously it's the other agencies, it's the corporate, I mean, I meant population in the broad sense of the people who in theory they have the best interest for.
You know, it's interesting in the realm of asset management, cities, there's a bunch of people, I'm a New Yorker, live in New York City, although I just moved about 9 months ago to Research Triangle, so I'm not exposed to the disaster scenario. But after 9/11, if you recall, 500 different infrastructure projects. This is not cyber. Okay, this is just managing the city and getting it back on its feet. There are people who were really, really good, and they worked for the mayor as special appointees, but they were really good organizationally at bringing a lot of complex projects together. So I think that can be done, with the right, the leadership, political leadership has to connect to, practitioners who really know how to do this.
The gloomy part, and I don't want to end on a gloomy note, especially before the beer, but a lot of my
beer's
colleagues
for.
on panels like this, I don't tend not like to do this, they say, unfortunately, until we hit a cyber Pearl Harbor, a pill equivalent to that, and hundreds or thousands of people die due to a cyber attack, you just don't get, it's in the paper for a day, a week if you're lucky, and it disappears quickly. I hope that's not going to be necessary. I hope there will be leaders who will see the vision and mobilize, as you said, not just the individual people, but their agencies, the other corporations. The equivalent, I think, what we saw happen, of course, admittedly, was in the aftermath of a disaster.
Yeah.
But the thing we have seen in New York and other places, that's where true leadership counts.
Yeah, but they're gonna, when that day, if God help us, that day should come, the leaders, we're assuming we're favored with good leadership, they're gonna come to you, Marty. They're going to come to all the people in this room that understand the problem and been thinking about it for all these years for advice and help on how to get this done quickly. And that's really important to keep in mind.
Well, quickly and get it done by tomorrow. I mean, rather call you now. They're going to call you and say, can you get this fixed? That's why you're interested, yeah.
Now you can blame me for delaying. It doesn't start till 6, by the way.
Oh, is that true? Oh, I'm going to get a beer before that. I'm sorry.
Sid's thirsty, man.
And somebody in the back there, wait a minute, go ahead, ask her, then we have someone in the back.
I think there are members of.
I won't forget you, I'm sorry.
I'm Tim Feldman with ISA, and an example, an illustrative example is the National Guard.
Yeah.
For the last 2 years, ISA has participated in an exercise called Cybersecurity. We've trained on the whole industrial control system, cybersecurity lifecycle, in scenarios on a water plant attack, a grid attack, et cetera, on the range, and for, natural disasters too. So, there's guard teams in 50 states that have begun to learn about these things. Somewhere in that guard structure with governors, they're starting to think about that. Now, whether it's drilling down to cities, I don't know.
Did the governors ask you to do that?
No, we're on contract with the National Guard, correct.
Oh, okay, I'm just wondering because I thought, I get it, I don't think the governors would do that, but maybe they would, I don't know, so.
Is there someone in the back there?
Yes,
So to,
be the last beer
with all,
holder.
sorry, Al.
No,
I'll
feel
be the
free.
blame. With the free market economy, where all decisions by business are driven by profit motive for the most part, when I hear that they may forego profit for security, that may be within their corporation, but I'm not seeing that extend out into the real world where I manage in essence, a city. The second thing I look at is the driving economic forces of the private sector are going to oppose some type of commonality of approach to this because it may not fit their business interests or they may not be the winner in that process. So I pose to the group here is, when do you think there will be development of a governance structure for this protection of a city? And what type of leadership training is going to be developed that will facilitate the politicians who really don't know what they're doing in a lot of these areas, the emergency responders who are really into gates guards and guns, if you will, to address these situations not after they happen, but to establish the framework before. And how long before we get that first beta setup rolled out?
Can I add to that just, do we need regulations? Do we need regulations? You didn't add it, I'm adding it. I don't want to blame you.
So let me try to end on a maybe somewhat positive note. I talked a lot about the need for leadership at the top, but I think also we need leadership from the bottom. And what I mean by that, once upon a time, organic food was, what are you talking about? And now it turns out that many people, in fact, an increasing number of people, find it desirable, even though it may be somewhat more expensive. So in some sense, what we do and what we say has influence on the industries, on the governments, all. And the example I like to pick, I like to have these end in one. If you told me I used to go to meetings like this 30, 40 years ago, this room would be full of smoke. I wouldn't be able to see you in the back row, if you remember what I'm talking about. If you told me there would be a time I'd go to a room like this and I wouldn't see anybody smoking, partly because it's not legal, but also partly because many of you realize it's not a good thing to do, I would have said, seems highly unlikely. Now, it took 30 or 40 years, and I'm not sure we can afford to wait 30 or 40 years. But one of the issues at the lower level, if you will, is get the individual population. This is a much bigger topic than we covered today. But the individual people, in the same way they learn to appreciate the value of organic foods, the value of not smoking, the value of cybersecurity. So we need to have that understood both at the leadership level, but more and more at the individual level. As that happens, then people say, I will not buy that product unless it has the UL code for cybersecurity in it. It hasn't happened today. I don't know how easy it's to happen, but I think that is a possible rosy future if we can find a way to get there, a rosier future.
Are you advocating that we should have someone attack everybody until they learn? That's one way. It might work if you attack their bank accounts or something. But you know, it was funny you mentioned the smoking, because I was going to make a comment. If I see any of you at the reception and I don't recognize you, it's because I've been sitting in front of these lights all day. So it's the same, so it's all smoky to me. And I'm an old ex-smoker, still chew nicotine gum. So, any other questions, comments? Okay, well, I hope you all enjoyed this session. And one thing, before you leave, I just want to make sure to remind you again, I don't have the slide, and I wouldn't even try to put the slide up after all these problems we've had. But the one where we have the sessions tomorrow, please look on the calendar. I think we have 2 sessions tomorrow, 2 on Wednesday and one on Thursday morning. Is that correct, Larry? Do you remember?